All right, we are more than just a little bit behind schedule this morning, so I want to convene the Emergency Preparedness and Campus Safety Committee. The good news is we won't be taking any action this morning other than receiving reports. Our committees have been very busy over the last couple of months. We've got a lot of information to share out here, and the goal will be to keep the subcommittees very busy for the next month or two and come out with some meaningful recommendations as we move forward. Mikey, do you want to just take roll of the subcommittee, please?
Yes, Present.
Here.
Mr. Martin?
Here.
Mr. Mosley?
Here.
Ms. Parker? Here. Thank you.
Oh, well, terrific. Welcome, Ava.
And Mr. Stavros?
There.
You have all of your members of your committee present.
Thank you, Mikey. We want to just get right into this for the sake of time. We have a variety of committees. As many of you recall, we broke up the group into 4 different task forces, one dealing with mental health issues and initiatives that Governor Marshall is taking the lead on. He'll be reporting out at our next meeting. That's correct, Governor Marshall. You're going to work through that with Student Affairs and talk about the mental health component at our next meeting. The next subgroup was police and law enforcement that Governor Parker is heading up. Notification systems and electronic systems, Governor Martin is heading up, and training and ID for at-risk students is Governor Chase's area. We're going to get reports from Governor Martin's group, Governor Chase's group, and Governor Parker's group in that order. And Governor Martin, if you'd like to begin, please.
Certainly, thank you. For the sake of time, we're going to move through these very quickly this morning. First, I'd like to ask staff, Regina and Sophie, to come up and give us an overview of the recent report on the best practices for emergency notification systems.
Thank you, sir. Under the auspices of the FDLE, the State Working Group on Domestic Preparedness, convened a ad hoc committee to take a look at university and college communities' emergency notification systems. That committee had members not only from the universities, FAMU, University of Florida, University of South Florida, but it was primarily staffed by FDLE staff. One of the things that they were charged with doing was to come up with best practices and guidance for not only the SUS, but also for the community colleges and for the independent colleges and universities. So the report that they prepared includes all of that. The areas that they looked at included landlines, the use of landlines during emergencies, websites, audible outdoor devices, text messaging, the redundancy that you would expect any university to have in order to ensure that campus safety and alerts to campus communities occur in a timely fashion. They also looked at the use of the need for relationships to be built between the universities, community colleges, the counties, and the cities in order to make sure that there was not only redundancy in the devices, but redundancies in the various communities.
Very good. We also would like to have a brief presentation from Cal Kavanaugh, the Senior VP for Administration for the University of Florida. He can talk very briefly about notification systems for University of Florida.
Governor Martin, if it's okay, I'll just sit while I do this. My understanding is that a full presentation will be done at a subsequent meeting, and so I've been asked to just give kind of a high-level overview of some of the things that we're doing. First, I don't think there's a lot I'm going to share that is not in the front minds of virtually all of our other state university operations, as well as nationally, both public and private. The issue of notification and timely notification, especially in emergencies, is absolutely critical and one of the core issues that every university is facing. When we're looking at those items, we go through kind of a variety of variables that we're looking at, the modality that we're using, the issue of the redundancy, and also timeliness. As we look at that, we also have an existing, as do many campuses, campus emergency committee. We're very fortunate that we have some of the national leaders in law enforcement, in environmental health. We have a dedicated position on emergency management. For the campus, we look at human resource, student affairs, IT, and other groups that are on there. That committee is charged with not only looking at protocol, but also in doing a lot of work on the prevention side, also on training and building those redundancy pieces in there, and assisting with the evaluation of other modalities that come in. Specifically with the modalities that what we have at the University of Florida, we use all of the normal tools that one might expect. The issue of email communication, websites. We do have a unique piece where we've assembled in every physical building there is at least one, if not two, individuals that are building contacts, because some of the items that we deal with are geographically located in a certain area of the campus, so that becomes a redundancy piece. We also have terrific relationships with television, radio stations, so from a public announcement standpoint, we can disseminate information very, very quickly using those tools. The world has changed rather dramatically. Who would have thought that email is too slow in terms of a mode of communication? So we do have a reverse 911 system that is up and operational. We use that on our landlines. It can send out information to the campus, but we can also geographically dispense that and look at a specific building or a specific geographical area on the campus. We feel like we're in very good shape as it relates to quote-unquote the normal emergencies, things that we have a fair advance warning on. Hurricanes, as an example, we have a huge lead time on those. We can kind of massage the expectations of the campus for days and hours, and we're ready to go there. We do have some unique operations on our campus that we have to attend to. For example, the clinical operations. We may physically close classes, but we may keep clinics open, so getting that messaging out to both faculty, staff, patient population, as well as students in that arena is a challenge. One of the issues that we are exploring aggressively is the potential of using a third-party communication tool that would allow us to be able to do cell phone and text messaging communication. Some of the issues that we've run into there is, if you will, the size of the pipe, the ability to get a message out to a large number of people in a very quick time using those types of tools. So right now we feel that we've got a very comprehensive plan. We're using a host of modalities and tools to do that, but it is something that we're constantly evaluating, practicing, drilling upon.
Okay. Very good. As the staff and the board has been working to really seize the opportunity to get more involved and see what's going on in this particular area. Additionally, we've asked the UF Emergency Manager, Kenneth Allen, to assist in co-chairing a working group that will review the report, and in September at our regular meeting, we'll have more coming out, so we have work in progress. Gina, anything else like to?
I think that what Dr. Kavanaugh just shared was actually an overview of several things that are going on all of our campuses, and that the task force report from the FDLE actually served to underscore those things that our campuses are already doing to make sure that we are safe. I would also add that as recent as last evening, I got a report from AAU, the American Association of Universities, dealing with how its 42 members have responded to the aftermath of the Virginia Tech issue, and we'll be sharing that with you. Another example of just a number of people are taking a look at the issue and trying to come up with best practices.
Questions for Governor Martin or this group? Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh. Governor Chase.
Yes, my subcommittee's been looking at at-risk students, and I'd like to thank Dottie Manier and Regina Sofer for the support. Essentially, it's at-risk students and what is available for faculty and staff who are dealing with these students. And so one of the things that I did was to analyze each of the universities in a way that a faculty member or a staff member would, which is to go onto the web and try to find resources that would be available. And essentially, when you come in as a staff member or faculty member, there are three different ways that you can get your information. The first one would be through an orientation session. Orientation sessions often introduce the faculty and staff to what is available at a given university, but they are often not focused on the issue at hand, which is at-risk students. While they may tell you about where the counseling center is or what to do, in terms of faculty in particular, most of the orientation systems at our state universities focus on grant training, or how to put together a syllabi, or just simply getting new faculty involved in classes. So the orientation systems essentially are pretty cursory and in terms of the material that you actually find on the web as well. The second one is human resources, which is an obvious place that most faculty members would go to look because they're guided there in the orientation service in terms of benefits. And you go to human resources, you find that the training that is generally available in the human resources divisions of our universities relate to conflict resolution and diversity training in particular, which is in some ways peripheral but useful in terms of identifying at-risk students. And then finally, you'll be directed towards a counseling center. And in the counseling centers, there are actually, I could only find 2 websites and counseling centers that had sections that said faculty and staff that actually allowed you to pull down information in terms of what to do and how to identify at-risk students, and only one that actually gives you a guideline for procedures to follow in identifying different levels of at-risk students. So in general, one of the things that needs to be improved, and I think the subcommittee will look at more, is making this information more accessible, web accessible, which is where most of it would be coming from. But also there are other concerns in here in the fact that most faculty are also aware that they can't require anything. So most of these sites will have a faculty member or staff direct them to the counseling centers, but then there's no follow-up. And it also assumes face-to-face interaction of faculty, and a lot of our classes are no longer face-to-face, so some of this becomes difficult in terms of identifying at-risk students. And you also have a concern over aggravating the situation if the faculty member is not well-trained in terms of dealing with students. So the suggestion is how to educate the faculty, and what the subcommittee is exploring is actually putting together something like a DVD that could be distributed to chairs for discussions in smaller faculty groups in order to prepare faculty to deal with at-risk students, and then to also look at other best practices elsewhere. And that's essentially where we're at. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chase. Any questions or comments for Dr. Chase? All right. Thanks for your work. We'll look forward to next month's report. Governor Parker, are you still with us?
I am. Thank you, sir. How are you this morning?
Doing great. Welcome home.
Thanks. I'm actually watching everybody on television on my laptop here, so everybody looks great. I am.
Does the camera really add pounds, Governor?
We are very fortunate in that at our very first meeting, we happened to be meeting at the University of South Florida, where we have a Chief Tom Longo, who is chair of the SUS Chiefs of Police. And I thought it was just such a great idea, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving us the opportunity to actually have Chief Longo come and share some information with us. And I basically have asked him if he would address maybe 3 different issues for us. It's the accreditation, training of police officers, and officer to constituent population ratio. The idea is to present us with as much information as possible so as we make decisions down the road, we will at least have started with a framework. And we're just happy to represent, happy to welcome Chief Longo here with us, and ask if he would come and speak to the board this time.
Thank you, Governor Parker. And on behalf of the SUS chiefs that I represent, your chiefs of police, I want to thank the board for your leadership and energy in this issue, particularly in the wake of Virginia Tech, the tragedy that they had there. As was stated, the 3 issues that I'm prepared to speak to today are accreditation, training, and officer to constituent ratio. I'll take them in that order. I see that accreditation is a very familiar topic to everyone in the room, so I can immediately jump into the 3 potential sources of police accreditation in the state of Florida. 2 are national, 1 is state. The first I'll discuss is the Commission on Law Enforcement Accreditation, or as we call it, CALEA. That is a national level accreditation, and in fact was the first accrediting body for law enforcement agencies. The second and the newest is the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators, or ICLEA as we call it. And the third is a Florida-specific accreditation, the Commission on Florida Law Enforcement Accreditation, or CFA. The University of South Florida Police Department is and has been for a number of years accredited by CFA. These programs are substantively very similar. They have as their goal a totally smooth operating police department with integrity that takes into account risk management principles and makes the organization function for its constituents in the best way that it can. That being said, the issue for chiefs or institutions then becomes which one of these do they select, or do they select more than one, because you can. There are varying things that can come into that calculus. One could be the perception of national level accreditation, another could be cost. As an example, the University of South Florida pays $1,000 to belong to CFA. If we were to seek accreditation through CALIA, that amount would be $8,400. ICLEA would be $7,000. Considering the fact that they're substantively very similar and we achieve what we desire to achieve through CFA, we have elected to stay with CFA. If the chiefs have a recommendation with regard to which accreditation would be recommended that they pursue by anyone else, we would rather that the choice be left up to the individual institution to select the vendor of accreditation that best suits their needs, whether that be CFA or national level.
Are we safe to say that all of our university police forces are accredited in some category?
Not at this time. Most are. A recommendation that all are, I think, is very healthy, and then, of course, leaving it up to the individual institution which one they select.
Okay.
The next issue is training. In a nutshell, the training that university police officers receive is identical to that the county and city law enforcement officers receive. In fact, the University of South Florida recruits our new police officers from graduates of regional training academies. So they've received the same training and passed the same state test that a Tampa police officer or Temple Terrace police officer or deputy sheriff would have. There is a nuance and difference in service delivery that makes us distinctive, and that we very closely focus on problem-oriented policing and solving these problems so that we can get our constituents back to their academic mission. Some cities don't always have that luxury because of call volume, particularly large jurisdictions. We do have that luxury. That's one of the things we love about university policing, and we definitely want to continue that paradigm. That's more of a cultural aspect to university policing rather than something that we are trained formally in. And I also would like to say that when our officers do sometimes move on to other agencies, they fare very, very well because they've learned not only to be an effective law enforcer, but also a very effective diplomat. Annual recertification training is not emerging, but a burgeoning area. As you can well guess, law enforcement is a high liability business. We train every year. We recertify in the use of firearms. Defensive driving and pursuit driving is another high liability area. We have legal updates, defensive tactics. Many of these things are mandated to us, just as many professions have the CEU requirement to retain your certification or licensure. We have the same type of thing we deal with in Florida. In the wake of Virginia Tech, and actually I have to say before that, because this has been a topic of chiefs across the country, seeing what was happening in the high schools with Columbine and other locations where this has occurred, we knew that it was only a matter of time before an active shooter type situation would occur on a college campus, and it indeed has done so. The active shooter training is not provided in Florida basic law enforcement academies. It's provided in service. In-service training naturally is very instructor intensive. It requires overtime and it's somewhat disruptive, but all training is. It's very intensive because you have to have the time not only to train in the law, but in tactics, and you have to do simulation and role playing and so forth. One recommendation that I would have is that active shooter training be put into the field training program that all law enforcement agencies have. When a police officer comes to us, he or she is trained in the basic academy. Once they're hired on, they then go into a field training program, which is anywhere from 10 to 17 weeks in length, depending on the agency. That's where they ride with another officer who is a mentor to that person. They learn actually how to apply what they learn in the academy and how to do the job on the street. There's also an educational component to that, and we at the University of South Florida are in the process of creating lesson outlines and implementing active shooter training into the FTO program, so that once officers are cut loose to work on their own, they will have actually done this in every case. Of course, there's annual refresher training, as I mentioned earlier, and active shooter more than ever needs to be a part of that. The third issue is officer to constituent ratio. There are two sub-issues here. The first is officer to student ratio, which is probably the more common to see. The second is rather analogous to a municipality that may have a bedroom population of 10,000 but a daytime population of 70, when their factories or their office buildings fill with people, their parking garages fill with cars. Students are one component of a large university, for example, USF, also University of Florida, many others, with hospitals, teaching clinics, Florida Mental Health Institute we have here, Moffitt Cancer Center. There are many, many visitors with many different reasons for being here during our daytime. The International Association of Chiefs of Police has promulgated a recommendation that law enforcement agencies seek a officer to constituent ratio of 2 per 1,000, or 1 to 500. That is for community policing purposes, because community policing is very intensive in pressing the flesh, so to speak, getting out of the car, talking to people, getting to know them, letting them know you as a person that they can call when they have problems or issues that they want to talk about that we may not otherwise hear about and that affect quality of life. That's especially important on a campus, because we're not just about law enforcing, we're about the education of the student and about ensuring that the environment that they're in is conducive to their success, whether they be a researcher, a student, or even faculty staff here doing what they do. We would recommend at base a 1 to 600 ratio. 1 to 500 would be great, obviously. We're cognizant of the fact that there are budget cuts looming. We may eventually want to get to a 1 to 500 ratio, but at present, looking at other agencies around the state and country, we believe a 1 to 600 ratio would be a good benchmark. But I have to temper that with saying that certain institutions currently, for example, the University of Florida, has a better ratio than that, and that suits their needs considering their environment. So again, as in accreditation selection, I would suggest that some discretion be given to the institution to craft its police force to meet the needs of its environment. But 1 to 600 would be a good benchmark, not to stray above, we would say. Other factors that should be considered is whether the campus is urban, such as we are, or rural or suburban campus, whether there are residence halls, and if so, how many students actually live in residence halls. I'm sure most of you remember your undergrad days and some of the things that went on, and when you have 2,000 people living on a campus at night as opposed to 10,000 people, your problem set can be significantly different. That's something else to be taken into consideration. Also, something that's not discussed widely is the infrastructure that we are here to protect. Obviously, we have buildings, we have cars, but particularly with a research university, there can be other things of not particularly obvious import. One would be nuclear materials. Other could be government contracts, research contracts that are being performed on the campuses that may be not widely known publicly. Some may be behind some fairly elaborate security measures, and we would be the primary police force to respond to anything, be it a fire, a burglary, an active shooter, anything that occurs in those locations. We would be the primary responding agency for that. That concludes my remarks.
Great. Thank you very much, Chief Longo. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions for the chief? I don't see any, Governor Parker.
Mr. Chair, it is our goal to work with Chief Longo and the other chiefs of police in the system and ask that they would come together and meet between now and our next meeting in September, and we'll work with them and hope we have some recommendations for the state to consider at our September Board of Governors meeting. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Governor Parker. Chancellor Rosenberg.
I just wanted to thank the chief, and on behalf of all of us, to all the chiefs, to thank them for the measure of safety that they do provide. I do want to comment that I want to make sure the board understands that most of our police departments do not meet that 1 to 600 ratio. So I want to make sure that that's on the record so that you know that this is a problem for us, and that's why we brought this to you a few months ago. And we'll obviously be discussing it more in other meetings, but just want to make it clear that most of our units do not come close to meeting that ratio.
What are the ratios that are maintained at some of the AAU universities or other large universities across the country? Are they that 1 to 600, or do we know?
We're looking at that, and the initial numbers I've seen are kind of all over the board. I've seen some that are in the 1 to 300 range, and I've seen some that are higher than we are.
And are you aware of any other system who wants to take this on, and any kind of criteria or numbers or recommendations that they may be postulating?
No, sir, I'm not.
Anything else for the chief? Yes, Gus.
You know, we're talking about an almost impossible situation. When you get, for example, the University of Florida, 1,000 buildings on 2,000 acres, 6 paved roads in and out, you know, how do you control that? I visited Virginia Tech about 2 weeks after the problem they had, and they had a big sign that said, visitor pass is not necessary. People are coming in and out all the time. So we can do the things that were mentioned today. How do you control every student? How do you have a physical or psychological test on every student? How can you control the people coming in and out? It's a difficult situation, and I like the presentation that was just made at USF, and the best you can do. I don't know what else can be done, Mr. Chairman.
Governor, I think you're right on, particularly when you balance the fact that this board has said that it's essential that we maintain our open campus policies, and we don't want to throw walls around our universities, and we want to make certain that this is an open environment. So, yeah, there are some delicate challenges, and I think with what Dr. Chase is working on, some earlier identifications, some training and response techniques that may be helpful, certainly notification programs that if there is a problem, we can respond to it more quickly. You know, I think the chief will be the first to tell you that unfortunately campus police aren't necessarily here to prevent crime. They're certainly here to be a deterrent to it, but no police force can prevent a crime. The idea will be to contain, to minimize, and to make certain that if something goes wrong, the proper response is in place. President Kasich?
I appreciate the conversation, and campus safety is something that's everybody's business and everybody's responsibility and concern. And I know that the Chancellor last year pulled everybody together. I know I spoke in front with Chief Longo in front of the Governor's Commission on Safety, and we pulled together numbers that showed that many of the police officers on the campuses are at a disadvantage compared to the cities and the counties because they are at a higher pay grade, and this is metropolitan, but it's also actually it's more than metropolitan. It's almost everywhere. So you came up with a figure of 3.6. Is that million? Is that what the number was?
There were 3.2, I believe.
Oh, 3.2.
Yes.
And is this something that we would want to bring again to the budget committee in the future, because we could sure use that help?
Madam President, not wanting to reopen the last 3 hours conversation, that is one of the elements that you will see in a revised budget next month, the fact that there was no security, it didn't fit in any of the proper moldings, but we will, in addition to having the university presidents come with agenda items that may have fallen through the areas in our groupings, you will see an additional request for security funding as well, and probably in line with the number that this board requested of the legislature last session.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. Governor Parker, anything else?
Anything further, Mr. Chair?
Great, thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
For your time and keeping us safe. Chancellor Rosenberg, you want to update us on hurricanes?
Just as a follow-up to our task force, as you may recall, in November of 2006 and then again in January, our Emergency Management Task Force made a presentation. It largely was pivoting around response to hurricanes, but also did address pandemic and bioterrorism issues. I'm really pleased to report to you today that Dr. Steve Morris and Dr. Fred Sloan from their project directors of the Disaster and Bioterrorism Training here at USF, the College of Nursing. They have over 30 years of experience in medicine. They serve on a variety of national boards dealing with healthcare and disaster management. Dr. Morris couldn't be here with us today, but Dr. Sloan is. They're going to develop for us a template so that we may, a template of best practices so that we may share with all members of the state university system that will further prepare us to deal with bioterrorism, pandemic, health-related disasters. So we're mindful of the fact that those threats are out there. We're mindful of the fact that our universities are fragile environments and that we have to continue to advance the state of the art. So we'll be reporting back to you on that in a couple months, sir.
Great. Thank you, Chancellor. Anything else for the committee or the task force before we adjourn? Great. Let me just remind us all that it is hurricane season, hurricane month, and make the definitive point that what we're doing is on a state basis making some recommendations and will ultimately result in some recommendations, but obviously the first line of responsibility for all of campus safety, as we know, rests with our boards of trustees and the decisions that they're making, and we're confident that they're all doing and conducting the same analysis as we are and making some great recommendations to keep our students safe. So they're moving to hurricane season. Hopefully our preparations are in place, and we'll be hearing from our boards of trustees and finding out what exactly they're doing on their analysis as well. If there's no other conversation.
Pardon me, Governor. Dr. Sloan is here. Could you stand and be recognized for your efforts to help us? Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Sloan. If there's nothing else, I will close this meeting of the Emergency Preparedness and Campus Safety Committee and turn the gavel mercifully back over to Madam Chair.